Imagine hearing words that could change your life forever from someone you never expected. This is my story of love, betrayal, and an impossible choice that altered everything. Before we begin, please note that this story touches on sensitive topics, including complicated family dynamics, blurred boundaries, and secrecy. If themes such as emotional entanglement and betrayal make you uncomfortable, this may not be the story for you. My name is Alex and I was 34, living in the small town of Brookside in the Pacific Northwest, when everything changed. At that point, my life felt stuck in neutral. I wasn't a failure, but I wasn't exactly winning either. I had a steady job, paid my bills, and even had a decent apartment. From the outside I appeared fine, but inside I always felt 2 steps away from falling apart. I was lonely. Not the kind of loneliness that makes you want to stay in on a Friday night, but a deep-seated isolation that crept into your bones, even when you were surrounded by people. It's strange how you can be out with friends laughing and still feel completely disconnected, as if you're present but not really there. Sure, I had my moments of confidence, days when I thought, yeah, I've got this. But those moments were always short-lived. Most of the time I found myself second-guessing. Was I good enough? Did people really like me? Or were they just tolerating my presence? It was exhausting living in my own head. When it came to relationships, I truly desired connection. Yet every time things began to feel serious, I started to pull back. Afraid of getting hurt, afraid of not measuring up, and terrified that someone might see all my flaws and decide I wasn't worth the trouble. So I kept people at arm's length. Except for Elena. Elena is my older sister by 5 years, always larger than life. She's the kind of person who walks into a room and shifts the very energy around her. People notice her, they can't help it. She's beautiful, sharp, and quick with a comeback, yet also one of the most complicated people I know. Elena married young, too young if you ask me. At first she believed she was in love, and perhaps she was at the beginning. But love alone doesn't keep the lights on when fights begin to pile up. Her marriage was messy, and watching her go through it was painful. Elena had always been the strong one, yet that marriage broke something inside her. I still remember the night she called me after it was finally over. She didn't cry, not immediately. Elena isn't one to let people see her weaknesses. Instead, she talked about how relieved she felt, how ready she was for a fresh start. But I knew better. Her voice cracked just enough for me to sense the unspoken truth. She felt like a failure. After the divorce, she threw herself into work, acting as if she were fine, but I knew the nights were the worst for her. She hated being alone, despised the silence, and no matter how strong she tried to appear, I could see the loss in her eyes. Growing up in Brookside wasn't always easy. Money was tight, arguments were loud, and sometimes it seemed our small house couldn't contain all the tension. Yet Elena and I created our own little world amidst the chaos. We spent late nights watching movies, sharing whispered secrets under blanket forts, and supporting each other through every challenge. Elena helped me with my homework when our parents were too busy arguing, and I cheered her on at her basketball games, even when she missed every shot. Through it all, we were inseparable. As we grew older, life tried to pull us apart. Elena got married, and I became busy building my career, but we never drifted too far apart. Whenever things went wrong with her husband, Elena would call, and I'd show up with takeout and bad jokes to make her smile. And when her marriage finally ended, I was there for her without question, because that's what siblings do. Looking back, perhaps we leaned on each other too much. Maybe we blurred the lines between sibling support and something more. It's hard to explain, but there was always something unusually close about us, closer than most siblings. After her divorce, that closeness began to feel heavier, as if we were carrying more than just shared memories. There was something unspoken between us that neither of us wanted to confront. And yet we continued to act as if nothing was amiss, just brother and sister, helping each other through difficult times. I didn't realize it then, but the night everything changed had been building for a long time. I still remember the evening Elena told me about her divorce. It wasn't a dramatic announcement with tears and shouting. No, it was quiet, almost too quiet. We were at a family gathering in Brookside, a half-hearted attempt to keep everyone connected. The atmosphere was noisy with people laughing, kids running around, and the scent of barbecue in the air. But Elena sat off to the side, nursing a glass of wine and staring into nothingness. I could tell something was wrong the moment I saw her. Elena had always managed to keep it together in public, But that night, it seemed all her strength had drained away. I sat down beside her and asked, "What's going on?" At first she brushed it off, saying she was just tired. But when I didn't leave, she finally said, flatly and emotionlessly, "It's over. I signed the papers yesterday." I didn't know what to say to someone whose life had just been turned upside down, so I did the only thing I could. I reached over, grabbed her hand and said, "You don't have to go through this alone." That's when she broke. She didn't make a scene, but I saw it in her eyes, the way they filled with tears she fought to hold back, and the way her fingers tightened around mine, as if she were holding on for dear life. That night I took her home. We didn't talk much. She just sat on my couch, staring blankly at the TV, while I sat beside her, silently watching as she wiped her face every few minutes. I didn't know it then, but that was the night everything began to shift. In the weeks that followed, Elena started leaning on me more. At first it was just simple things, asking me to come over and fix something around her apartment or calling late at night just to talk. But soon it became more. She began opening up in ways she never had before, confessing how lonely she felt and how utterly broken her marriage had left her. She admitted things I never thought she would share. And with every word, our bond deepened in ways I hadn't anticipated. I'd hear from her how she sometimes wondered if she'd ever be enough for anyone, or if she was destined to always end up alone. I listened every single time because I knew what it felt like to doubt yourself, to wonder if you'd ever be good enough. The more Elena talked, the closer we became. We began spending almost every evening together, watching movies, making dinner, sharing bottles of wine that always seemed to empty too fast. At first it felt harmless, almost normal, like two siblings simply helping each other through tough times. But looking back, I can see how things started to shift. I began noticing little things, how her laughter came easier when I was around, how she'd lean in closer than before, how she would touch my arm while talking, even when there was no obvious reason. It wasn't just her. I started feeling it too. I found myself looking forward to those evenings more than I probably should have. I couldn't help but notice how beautiful she looked when she let her guard down. Her hair a bit messy, makeup smudged, sitting cross-legged on my couch as if she'd always belonged there. It scared me. I told myself it was just the wine or the late nights playing tricks on my head. But the more time we spent together, the harder it was to ignore the change. There was one night that stands out. We were watching an old movie, one she picked because it reminded her of our childhood in Brookside. And halfway through, Elena leaned her head on my shoulder. Instead of pulling away, I let her. We sat like that for what felt like forever. When she finally looked up, I saw something in her eyes that made my stomach drop and my heart race. I wanted to break the moment before it turned into something else, but before I could, she smiled softly and said, "I don't know what I'd do without you." And just like that, whatever wall we'd been hiding behind cracked. After that night, we stopped pretending there wasn't something different between us. We never discussed it openly, but every shared glance and gentle touch felt heavier, more charged. We began cooking dinner together instead of ordering takeout, even sharing the same glass rather than pouring two. It was subtle yet unmistakable. The more it happened, the less guilty I felt. Because with Elena, I didn't have to pretend to be strong, funny, or put together. I could simply be myself, and I think she felt the same. I no longer saw her solely as my sister, and judging by the way she looked at me, she no longer saw me just as her brother. I still remember the night Elena told me about her divorce. It wasn't a dramatic announcement with tears and screaming. It was quiet, almost too quiet. We were at a family gathering in Brookside, one of those half-hearted attempts to keep everyone connected. The room buzzed with laughter, children ran around, and the aroma of barbecue filled the air. Yet Elena sat off to the side, nursing a glass of wine and staring into nothingness. I could tell immediately that something was wrong. Elena had always been so good at keeping it together in public, but that night, it seemed all her strength had drained away. I sat down beside her and asked, "What's going on?" At first she brushed it off, saying she was just tired. But when I stayed by her side, she finally said in a flat, emotionless tone, "It's over. I signed the papers yesterday." I didn't know what to say to someone whose world had just been upended, so I did the only thing I could. I reached over, grabbed her hand and said, "You don't have to go through this alone." In that moment she broke. No dramatic scene ensued. Instead, I saw her eyes fill with tears she fought hard to hold back, and her fingers tightened around mine as if she were holding on for dear life. That night I took her home. We didn't talk much. She sat silently on my couch, staring blankly at the TV while I remained by her side, watching as she discreetly wiped away her tears. I didn't know it then, but that was the night everything began to shift. In the following weeks, Elena started leaning on me even more. Initially, it was small favors, asking me to help fix something in her apartment or calling late at night just to talk. But gradually, she began opening up in ways she never had before, confessing her loneliness and the deep pain left by her failed marriage. She admitted once again that she sometimes wondered if she'd ever be enough for anyone. And I listened each time because I understood that doubt all too well. The more she talked, the closer we grew. We continued to share nearly every evening together, watching movies, preparing meals, and sharing bottles of wine that vanished all too quickly. What started as sibling support slowly blurred the lines between familial love and something deeper. I no longer saw Elena merely as my sister, and by the way she looked at me, I knew she no longer saw me only as her brother. Elena never spoke directly. She only hinted, and then everything happened spontaneously. Perhaps that is exactly what makes it so hard to explain. Elena had a very rough week. Around 10 p.m., she called me in a trembling voice, as if she had been crying, saying that she didn't want to be alone. When I arrived at her apartment, I found her sitting on the floor in sweatpants and an oversized hoodie, surrounded by half-empty wine bottles and old wedding photos. "I'm so tired of feeling like this," she said. I didn't know what to say, so I sat down beside her and picked up one of the photos. It was her wedding picture, taken when she looked so beautiful and happy in a way I hadn't seen for years. But her eyes didn't reflect that joy. It was as if even then she knew that happiness wouldn't last. Elena snatched the photo from my hand and tore it in half. "I wasted so many years, and in the end it all led to being alone," she said. I told her that she was never alone, that she had me by her side. But when I looked into her eyes, I saw a heavy, searching gaze, as if she was trying to determine whether I truly meant it. And then before I knew what was happening, she kissed me. I froze, every part of me screamed stop. Yet I didn't pull away. I returned the kiss, and for those few seconds nothing else mattered. Not because she was my sister or because the creeping guilt in my mind, but simply because in that moment everything felt incredibly right. But then the moment ended and reality hit us like a punch. Elena pulled away first, her face flushed and her breathing uneven. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I don't know why I did that." I wanted to say it was okay, but no words could ease the pain of how wrong everything had become. We sat in silence for what felt like hours until she finally murmured, "Maybe you should go." And so I left. On the drive home, my mind kept replaying the kiss, Elena's gaze, and the way my heart raced every time I thought about that moment. I told myself it was just a mistake, a one-time thing. But deep down I knew that wasn't true because I didn't regret it, not even a little, and that realization made me hate myself. After that, everything didn't stop. Late nights gradually turned into overnight stays, dinners became mornings tangled in sheets, and every time we promised it would be the last time, it never ended. We were playing with fire, fully aware of the risks, yet the feeling was so familiar, so safe and intoxicating, that neither of us wanted it to stop. About 3 weeks later, Elena called me again, her voice trembling though she tried to sound normal. "Hey, I need to talk to you," she said. I immediately sensed something was wrong. My heart tightened. "What's going on?" I asked. I think something is wrong with me," she replied. I drove to Elena's apartment without asking too many questions. When I arrived, I saw her pacing in the living room, her hands twisting nervously. "I'm late," she said, and that simple phrase struck me straight in the heart, even though I already knew what it meant. We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity until Elena finally broke it. "You know, I might be pregnant." Those words hung in the air, heavy like smoke, impossible to ignore. I tried to reassure her. "Maybe it's just stress. Maybe your body is reacting to everything you've been through." But we both knew it wasn't that simple. We waited another week, each passing day feeling like a punishment, watching her count the days, worrying over every little ache, every cramp. Elena was scared, and to be honest, so was I. Finally, I convinced her to take a blood test. At first, she didn't want to, but we couldn't keep pretending nothing was happening. We went to the clinic together. The nurse regarded us like a nervous couple waiting for answers. When the nurse brought out the results, her face lit up with, "Congratulations." But I felt frozen, only hearing the echo of that word, which wasn't what we wanted to hear. I looked at Elena, and for the first time in weeks, I saw in her eyes not fear, but a glimmer of hope, which was even more frightening. On the drive back, we remained silent. Elena stared out the window, while I gripped the steering wheel as if it were the only thing keeping me grounded. When we got to her apartment, I finally broke the silence. "What are we going to do now?" Elena didn't answer immediately. Instead, she walked over to the couch, sat down, and pulled her knees close as if trying to make herself smaller. "I don't know," she whispered. In that moment, I realized that I didn't know either. Part of me was terrified, unsure how to explain to others that the person I'd always felt closest to was now carrying my child. Yet another part of me couldn't deny the thought of becoming a father, not as frightening as I had imagined. In fact, it gave me a feeling I hadn't felt in years, a sense of purpose. I sat beside Elena and said, "Maybe this doesn't have to be a bad thing." Her eyes snapped up to mine. "Are you serious?" I nodded. "I don't know how we'll get through this, but I love you, and I've loved this baby from the very start." For the first time since it all began, Elena cried. But these weren't tears of pain. They were tears of relief. The following days passed like a hazy dream. We talked about everything, what it would mean to keep the baby or not. Elena was all over the place. One moment she was dreaming about baby names and decorating the nursery, and the next she was panicking about what people would think, about our parents' reactions, and the consequences if this secret were ever revealed. I had no answers, only a desperate wish to say that everything would be okay, though I wasn't sure at all. After hours of discussion, Elena said, "Maybe this is our chance." I asked, "What do you mean?" She replied, "Maybe this is the one thing that finally gives everything meaning. We've been fighting it for months, but perhaps we shouldn't." I wanted to believe her, but my mind kept recalling how fragile everything already was, and adding a baby wasn't a way to fix things. It was like lighting a match and hoping the fire wouldn't burn everything down. We promised to give ourselves a week to decide, to figure out what we truly wanted, but deep down, I knew there would never be a perfect answer. No matter which path we chose, we would have to live with the consequences, and that scared me more than anything. For the next 2 weeks, we lived as if we weren't breaking any rules. Everything didn't happen all at once. After that night at the clinic, Elena stopped panicking. Instead, she allowed herself to dream. She often stroked her stomach when she thought I wasn't looking, and every so often she'd flash a soft, almost shy smile that made my heart tighten. We began acting like a real couple. No more pretending, no more avoiding our feelings. We cooked dinner together every night, laughing as if nothing else mattered. Elena gradually started leaving her belongings at my place, her hairbrush in my bathroom, her sweaters draped over my couch, and the way she looked at me became different. I caught her quietly staring at me one evening while we were having dinner. "You're going to be such a good dad," Elena said. I didn't know what to say. I just smiled back and reached for her hand. For the first time in years, I felt like I had a place in the world, like I wasn't just drifting through life waiting for something to make it all make sense. I started picturing it, holding our baby, taking them to the park, teaching them how to ride a bike. And then I saw Elena standing next to me, smiling the way she used to when we were kids, and for a moment, everything felt simple. It scared me how easy it was to imagine that life, but deep down I knew it couldn't last. Reality broke through the first time when we were at the store looking at baby clothes. Elena held up a tiny onesie, white with little yellow ducks, and laughed. "Can you picture our baby in this?" I smiled, but something inside me shattered because no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't envision it outside the walls we built around ourselves. What would people say if they found out? What would they call us? The questions started piling up, and suddenly, the walls didn't feel as strong as they once did. I wasn't the only one feeling it. Elena began having moments when she drifted off, lost in thought, chewing her lip the way she always did when she was anxious. One night she broke down completely. We were lying in bed when she just started crying big, heaving sobs that shook her whole body. "What if we're making a mistake?" she asked. I held her, but I didn't have an answer. The day she decided it was over felt as if the world stopped turning. Elena never made it dramatic. We were sitting on the couch when she said, quietly and with certainty, "I can't do this." I didn't argue because as much as I wanted to fight for that dream, I knew it wasn't real, not outside the little bubble we had been living in. We talked about it for hours, going back and forth between hope and fear, until there was nothing left to say. In the end, it wasn't just about the baby. Keeping the baby meant keeping the secret, and keeping the secret meant living a life that felt more like hiding than truly living. We couldn't do it. Elena scheduled the appointment and I went with her. We didn't talk much that day. She held my hand in the waiting room, squeezing it so tightly that my fingers went numb. When it was over, we sat in the car for almost an hour, neither of us ready to face what came next. The apartment felt different after that. Elena stayed with me for a few more days, but it wasn't the same. The laughter was gone, and the closeness we had built over those 2 weeks felt fragile like glass. We were too afraid to touch. She cried at night when she thought I was asleep, and I couldn't stop thinking about what we had lost. I didn't regret the decision, not really, but I did regret how much it had changed us. No matter how much we tried to pretend otherwise, something between us had broken, and I wasn't sure if we could ever fix it. After the appointment, things unraveled faster than I expected. Elena stayed for another week, but we barely spoke. She would sit by the window for hours, staring outside as if she were waiting for something, or maybe someone who was never coming back. I tried to comfort her. I cooked her favorite meals and put on movies we used to watch as kids, but nothing worked. Then one night she packed her bags. "I need space," she said, her voice calm though I could see the cracks just under the surface. I didn't stop her, maybe I should have, but part of me thought it was what she needed and maybe what I needed too. After she left, the silence in my apartment was suffocating. I tried to keep busy, threw myself into work, went out with friends, but nothing filled the hole she left behind. I told myself it was for the best, that we couldn't keep living in that bubble forever. But the truth was I missed her. Elena remarried 2 years later. I didn't go to the wedding, I couldn't. I saw the pictures online. Her in a white dress, smiling as if she were finally happy again. Her new husband, Franklin Humphrey, looked like the kind of guy who had his whole life figured out, stable, safe, exactly what she thought she needed. I told myself I was happy for her, but late at night, when it was just me and my thoughts, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over. Not for me and maybe not for her either. I tried to move on too. I dated a few people, even convinced myself once or twice that I might be falling in love, but it never lasted. No matter who I was with, my mind always drifted back to Elena, to the way she laughed when she let her guard down, to the way she looked at me that first night, as if I were the only person in the world who really saw her. Years after her wedding, Elena called me. I almost didn't answer. It had been so long since we talked that hearing her voice felt surreal, like I was dreaming. "Alex," she said, and just hearing my name broke me all over again. She told me her marriage was over. Franklin had tried, she had tried, but no matter what they did, something was missing. Then she said the words that stopped my heart. "I told him about us." I didn't know what to say. She explained slowly, as if she were still trying to make sense of it herself. "He asked why I couldn't love him the way he loved me," she said, "and I couldn't lie anymore. I told him the truth. I've never stopped loving you." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. I wanted to tell her that I loved her too, that I never stopped, but all I could manage was, "What now?" Elena moved back to town a few weeks later. At first we kept it simple, coffee, walks in the park, pretending we were just catching up like normal siblings. But it didn't take long before all the old feelings came rushing back. One night we were sitting on my couch and she asked, "Do you ever think about what it would have been like if we'd kept the baby?" I nodded. Every day she would lean her head on my shoulder, just like she used to, and whisper, "I still want that life." I didn't say anything, but I wrapped my arm around her, and for the first time in years, everything felt right again. I don't know if what Elena and I have makes sense to anyone else. I'm not even sure it always makes sense to us, but I've stopped caring about what other people think. We've spent so much of our lives running from our feelings, from our mistakes, from each other, and now I'm done running. Elena can't have kids anymore. That door closed a long time ago, but it doesn't matter because what we have is real. It's messy, it's complicated, and it's probably wrong in more ways than I can count, but it's ours, and after everything we've been through, that's enough for me. It's been years since Elena and I stopped pretending we lived together, and now most days it feels normal. Not the kind of normal you see in movies or on TV, but our kind of normal, the kind we built out of broken pieces and second chances. Elena still can't have kids, and that part still stings sometimes, more for her than for me. She tries not to let it show, but I see it in the way her eyes linger when we pass families at the park, or when she flips through old baby photos online, and it hurts. But we've learned to find happiness in other places. We travel when we can, try new restaurants, spend lazy Sundays watching bad reality TV, and make each other laugh at the dumbest things. It's not the life I imagined, but it's ours, and for the first time in my life I don't feel like I'm running or hiding. I feel like I'm home. Looking back, I can't say I did everything the same. There are nights I still lie awake wondering what would have happened if we'd made a different choice. If we'd kept the baby or if we'd walked away from each other before it got this far. But regrets? No, I don't regret loving her. What I've learned is that love doesn't always make sense. Sometimes it shows up in the wrong place at the wrong time, and forces you to make impossible decisions. And those decisions, they don't just shape your life, they define it. I've learned that mistakes don't make you a bad person. Running from them does. And most of all, I've learned that happiness doesn't have to look the way everyone expects it to. Sometimes happiness is messy, complicated, and flawed. But if it's real, it's worth fighting for. I know this story isn't what most people would call normal. It's uncomfortable, it's complicated, and it's probably left you with more questions than answers. That's why I want to hear from you. What would you have done if you were in our shoes? Do you think a love like this can be forgiven, or should it always be left in the past? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I'll be reading them all. This isn't just my story. It's something I believe many people struggle with, even if the details look different. And if this story made you feel anything, shock, anger, sadness, hope, then share it. Maybe it'll help someone else feel less alone.